Welcome again to the session on Aristotle's Poetics. And we are taking up chapter 16 today. In chapter 16, Aristotle talks about the kinds of discovery. And he begins the chapter by saying that what recognition has been, I have already explained. We are now going to take up and enumerate on its kinds. He says the first less artistic form from which poverty of wit is most commonly employed is the recognition. And the recognitions or discovery, we have noted, he says, that a major portion has already been discussed. This is an important element in a tragedy because it lends structure to the plot. The six types of discovery, he discusses that there are six types of discovery. And out of these, the least artistic type, he says, is the recognition by means of signs or marks, because these are, although very frequently employed by dramatists, and the birthmarks, scars which are required after birth, the external tokens, necklaces, jewelry, anything of that sort. He says that a good kind of a discovery used by helps of signs, and although certain times bad discoveries are found in Odyssey, where in the bath story he says when Odysseus arrives in the disguise at his own palace and he's washed by the housekeeper who happened to be his old nurse. And this is in accordance with the custom because it was natural that the scar on his thigh should be discovered, thus his identity also recognized. This discovery arises from the incidents themselves, and the other kind of discovery happens when Odysseus simply declares himself to be the swineherds, pointing the scar as a proof of his birthmark. And this is an inartistic discovery according to Aristotle, which is manipulated by the poet. And these are the kinds, or the third kind, he says, depends upon object awakens or a feeling. Then he says that the fourth kind of discovery is produced by the reasoning. Through a process of reasoning, the link between events which are realized through a process of reasoning, it brings about certain discovery. And once again, he says the reasoning should be necessary outcome of certain course of events and not just imposed arbitrary. He gives an example of Orestes and Iphigenia. Then he says that the fifth type of discovery is not too clear, but he says it can arise from bad reasoning on the side of the other party. The meaning is not very clear. And the sixth is the best kind of, in which it is the most artistic, which grows out of the action itself. So, but all of the recognitions, he says, the best is that which arises from the incidents themselves, where the startling discovery is made by natural means. As in the Oedipus of Sophocles and Iphigenia, for it was natural that Iphigenia should wish to dispatch a letter, and these recognitions alone dispense with the artificial aid of tokens or amulets. So, the very nature of incidents, according to Aristotle, if they produce discovery, these are considered to be the best. Because in these plays, discovery is independent of any such external mechanical artifices or devices called necklaces or signs or amulets, and this is very natural, most credible to be believed. Chapter 17th and 18th also, Aristotle's is suggesting something for the act of how to write a tragedy, and he says that in constructing the plot and working out a proper diction of the plot, the poet should place the scene before his eyes, that is, visualize the action. This is what he says. Seeing everything within the utmost vividness, the spectator of the action, he says, will discover what is in keeping with it. So the poet should visualize what he actually wished to represent, and this obviously involves a great degree of imagination. And when he sees the action in through his mind's eye, it becomes more convincing, and it would also take the writer away from certain absurdities or improbabilities. So this is what the writer should keep in mind. Like, for example, there are critics who have pointed out certain lack of imagination on the poet's or the writer's part, which have lended difficult quality to the tragedy. Then he says, experience the emotions which are represented by the poet. Appropriate gestures who feel emotion are most convincing through natural sympathy with the characters. One who is agitated storms, one who is angry rages, most lifelike realities, etc. What he means by this is that it will always advisable for the poet or the writer to work out on the emotions or the gestures, because if the poet also experiences the same kind of emotion that he is presenting on the stage, it would help him to represent them more convincingly. And that is where, say, for example, the experience of anger or passion, if he wants to represent that, this will be the poet would be able to delineate these emotions in a lifelike manner if he imagines those emotions himself. Then he says a outline has to be made first. This, he says, what he means by this is that some kind of an inserted episodes, created episodes, they make the plot loose. So the poet has to make a rough kind of a draft or general outline of the action, and therefore the poet is sometimes called as craftsman also, because he creates and makes the draft. And then the term episodes or the events or the incidents which are included, they should feel like connected to each other. So it remains to fill in the episodes. The writer's part is to fill in the episodes, and they should be relevant to the action also. For example, he says in the story of Odyssey, a certain man is absent from home for many years. He is jealously watched by Sidon, left desolate, and then meanwhile his home is in a wretched plight. Suitors are wasting his substance and plotting against his son. So this is the essence of the plot, and rest of the things are the episodes which the writer creates. In chapter 18, he says that every tragedy falls into two parts: complication and unraveling or denouement. Incidents which are extraneous to the action are frequently combined with a portion of the action proper. To form the complication, the rest is the unraveling. By the complication, he says, I mean that anything that extends from the beginning of the action to the part which marks the turning point to good or bad fortune. This unraveling is that which extends from beginning of the change to the end. So he continues to give and render his suggestions on the practical aspects of writing tragedy. So the plot, he says, should be divided into two parts: the complication and the denouement. And therefore, the play, many dramatists, he says, the complication can be managed properly, but denouement fails. But a good dramatist has the quality to maintain a balance between the two. And the complication, which occurs from the beginning of the story to the point before a change in the hero's fortune, and the denouement, it includes everything from that change till the story's end. So these are the two parts. The story starts with the complication. The beginning of the story and the change in hero's fortune is complication. Immediately after that complication, whatever is written is denouement, which includes everything from the change till the end of the story. So all these external incidents which are proper to the play are presented in a play in such a way that those external events begin sometimes in a later stage also, but they should be properly compressed and concentrated to give some unity to the play. Then he also talks about some, say, the identification of complication we have already talked. Then he says that the writer should have to keep in mind the elements which are important for the complex tragedy to happen. He says, not make an epic structure into a tragedy. Epic structure, he says, I mean multiplicity of plot. So, for instance, you were to make a tragedy out of an entire story of Iliad, and in the epic poem, although length is the quality of an epic poem, but in a drama, the result is far from answering the poet's expectations. So, the whole story of the fall of Troy is a very big one, so it cannot be included. So, any incident picked out from that can be the part of a tragedy. So these scenes of, say, for suffering or pain or painful events, if they are depicted, scenes of murder, torture, etc., these and character and agents, which he says, these are the features which lend probability and beauty to any tragedy. Then he also says that chorus it should be regarded as one of the actors, and it should also be an integral part of the whole of the play. And in choral songs, he says pertaining little to certain pieces sung as mere interludes or difference between choral interludes and transferring of speeches.